Okay, so the US are sending a new weapons system to the Israelis, and not just the weapon system, but the soldiers used to man it as well. Okay, and this fits into, you know, or rather, the question should be, how does this fit into what happened with Iran? What is Iran's strategic posture going to be from now on? And kind of just the whole region in general, right? Let's zoom out for a second and just look at things more broadly. Because if you're the United States and you're sending a THAAD system to the Israelis, it obviously means that you're anticipating some kind of response from the Iranians at a future point, okay? And again, it's getting kind of tiring saying a response to the response to the response. We have to break from this terminology at one point, you know, and decide who began. But anyway, so just to kind of read this very briefly. So THAAD stands for Terminal High Altitude Area Defense. It's basically missile defense systems. They're surface-to-air missiles that shoot down ballistic missiles. Okay, so again, a ballistic missile is you know, it's basically, it's got a predetermined trajectory. You fire it up, and then you know it comes down in a parabolic manner, in a parabolic fashion, and you already know where it's going to land approximately. I mean, you know, a lot of the things that we saw fired in the last Iranian response on October 1st, these were mostly hypersonic missiles, far faster, and they could also be course corrected at the last second. If you compare that to what we saw on April 13th, I mean, it's a completely different caliber of weaponry. So the Americans are looking at that, and they're taking this much more seriously, as are the Israelis. But we still haven't seen a response to Iran's response of October 1st. Okay, so the Israelis claim they're still going to do something, but I'll just remind you, they said the same thing after April 13th, and they didn't really do anything. Okay, so this is perhaps maybe just the Israelis' way of guaranteeing that they don't ever get hit again the same way in the future. I'm not here to talk about that. This is not my main focus right now. Yes, obviously, you know, this carries with it an escalation, but what kind of escalation? Is it because, you know, you're going to have 100 American troops there, and you know, if Johnny and Mike get killed by Iran, then, you know, Joe Biden or whoever's in the White House by then is going to start a world war? No, this is not the main concern. You have to understand that what the Iranians, what the Israelis and Americans are really looking at, they're calculating how the Iranians are seeing things now. Now, this hasn't gone really reported for some reason in the media in the last couple of days, but it is very interesting, to say the least. Okay, so this is the 3 points. Okay, the first one, the Iranians are expected to launch something of a much stronger attack the next time, whenever that is. And the Americans and Israelis are taking that seriously. Okay, we've got through that. That's why they're sending the THAAD system. The second point is that the Iranians are threatening, or rather stating and indicating, that they're willing to recalculate their strategic posture. What does that mean? That could mean that they might develop nuclear weapons. It doesn't necessarily mean that, but it could mean that. And I'll go more into detail on that in a second. And also, right now, this is breaking news from just a few hours ago. You know, the Iranian foreign minister is basically saying, look, we're not interested in any more peace negotiations. Okay, I don't know if the Americans or the Israelis were you know, expecting that or not, but that's the latest news. Okay, and this could relate to the whole nuclear issue. Okay, because, you know, most people, when they read this, they think it's only related to what's going on in Gaza and so on. No, you have to understand that when the Iranians are negotiating regarding the nuclear issue, they don't view themselves as negotiating with the UN or the IAEA. And obviously the JCPOA has many people in it. It has the Russians and the Chinese and the Germans and so on who are part of that too. Yes. But they mainly view the IAEA as being controlled by the West. That is the Iranian perspective, and it's not completely unfounded either. So the point is, right now the Americans and the Israelis are going, well, what does it, does that include the nuclear issue? And if it does include the nuclear issue, to what capacity? And you have some very good stuff on this, both in Al Jazeera and also in Foreign Policy, going over what that means for Iran to recalculate. Because the way the Iranians have approached the nuclear program before is they basically look at it as it's like it's like a sweet spot, if you will, if you want to call it that. It's a sub-threshold level. What does that mean? It means like we're going to get all the tools ready that we need to make a nuclear bomb if we have to make a nuclear bomb, but we're not going to make the nuclear bomb, right? So it's kind of like the best of both worlds. You get to have the technology and make it dual use at, the drop of a hat. In real world terms, that means 6 months, 12 months, of course, minimum. But at the same time, you kind of show the world, well, look, I'm not a threat because I literally don't have a nuclear weapons program, which is also true, right? And again, I've done more than my fair share of JCPOA coverage, so go watch the playlists. But that really is their strategic outlook, their strategic posture for a nuclear program. And it always has been. It's been that way for the last couple of decades. You have to remember, in Iran, it's not just like a state that has the capacity to build a nuclear weapon and is not using that. It's a state that has, there's a religious fatwa, which is a religious decree issued by Ayatollah Khamenei against nuclear weapons. So it's a religious sin to build a nuclear weapon. It's not something you can just, you can't go around it or forego it. It really is there. You have actually right now, if you go and look in the news, you've got a block of MPs in Iran, in the Majlis, lawmakers in Iran, who are basically, they putting together a letter and asking him to forego the fatwa and to basically, to roll it back, to reverse it. So, because they view Iran as facing an existential threat because of everything that's happened in the last year. Okay, so my point is that this announcement here about ceasing peace talks, it could have that nuclear dimension to it as well. Once again, you could tell very easily if someone's building a nuclear bomb, especially today, because of not just faster intelligence gathering capabilities from human sources, but also you can observe these things with seismic, with seismographs. You can tell, right? Literally just by watching for mini earthquakes, if someone's testing a nuclear bomb, the regularity at which they're testing it, you can gauge quite well whereabouts they are. And I think even I can't remember who was saying this recently, which U.S. official it was. Was it Burns by chance? Let me just look this up quickly. No, it might have been Kerry, actually. I can't remember who it was. Give me a second. Oh, yeah, it was Burns. Yeah, it was, it's a CIA director, Burns, right? So he was saying just a week ago, 7 days ago, that Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapons program. Okay, so as much as the Israelis want to, go off about how they do, no, they don't. And even the CIA chief is saying that. And if the CIA chief is telling the truth, that means the Israelis are really lying, Anyway, so just to go back to this Al Jazeera article, which I found as quite foreboding in a way, and also quite informative. I wanted to read it to you because it talks about how an Israeli attack on Iran's nuclear facilities could backfire. And I put this, of course, in the context of what's been happening in the last couple of weeks, where you have Trump and Biden kind of exchanging, like who wants to be Israel's who wants to do more for Israel? They're basically saying, oh, well, we should bomb the nuclear sites and the energy sites in Iran. And then some of them are saying, no, we shouldn't do that, but we should be really tough on Iran, blah, blah, blah. I mean, like as if any, either one of them is any different. I mean, really at this point. Anyway, let me read this to you, okay? So they say here, since Iran's October 1 missile strike on Israel in response to the killing of Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah in Beirut and Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, there's been much speculation about how Tel Aviv will retaliate. Some observers have suggested it could hit Iranian oil installations and others its nuclear facilities. US President Joe Biden's administration seems to oppose both options. What do you base that on? Honestly, what do you base that on? I mean, because if you base that on just what Biden publicly says, then it means nothing, because guess what? He lies like all presidents in the world, and he said he doesn't like what Israel is doing in Gaza, and yet he keeps giving them weapons. So I'm just trying to understand what that is based on, but fine. Yet has approved the deployment of THAAD, so that's the missile defense system I was telling you about, high altitude, and US troops to Israel, possibly in anticipation of an Iranian response to an Israeli strike. Fine. And then they talk about how Trump wants Israel to hit the nuclear stuff first, and his son-in-law says the same. So, again, this sentence makes no sense to me. While Trump, Kushner, and other staunch Israel supporters are happy to cheer on an Israeli strike on Iran's nuclear facilities. So, again, stop right there. How is Biden, not a staunch Israel supporter? Like, does committing genocide or like participating in a genocide not count as being a staunch supporter? I would probably count that as one of the most supportive, quote unquote, things that you could be, as an ally, of another country or state or colony or whatever. So again, how is Trump more of a staunch supporter than Biden? He isn't. He's just as much. So let's say he's equal, at the very least equal to Biden. They are at the very least equal. I don't know which one of them would end up being, more staunch, but they are both staunch. So, whatever. Let us. So this writer gives us the example of Iraq. Okay, he says they likely know very little about the consequences of another such Israeli attack that targeted an Iraqi nuclear site. Again, not Iran, Iraq. Okay. So Israel's destruction of Iraq's French-built Osirak nuclear reactor in 1981 actually pushed what was largely a peaceful nuclear program underground and motivated Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein to invest in the pursuit of a nuclear weapon. An aggressive act against Iran's nuclear program will likely have a similar effect. So Iraq's nuclear program started in the 60s with the USSR building a small nuclear research reactor and providing it with some know-how. In the 70s, Iraq purchased a bigger reactor from France called Osirak and expanded its civilian nuclear program with significant French and Italian assistance. The French government made sure that technical measures were in place to prevent any possible dual use of the reactor, and it shared this information with the US, with Israel's closest ally. Iraq, which was a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and had its nuclear sites inspected regularly by the IAEA, was not on the brink of, quote-unquote, developing a nuclear weapon, as Israel falsely asserted. Nevertheless, the Israeli government, which was facing growing discontent domestically and a potential loss at the approaching legislative elections, decided to proceed with a preemptive strike. Yeah, because, that's always what you should do. When you're about to lose an election, just bomb someone. Anyway, on June 7, 1981, US F-15 and F-16 fighter jets, or I should say US-made, flew from Israel, refueled midair, and carried out a strike on the Osirak reactor, completely destroying it and killing 3 Iraqi civilians and 1 French engineer. The attack provoked nationalist fervor among Israelis that helped Prime Minister Menachem Begin, again, just like the scummiest terrorist scumbag, pinch a narrow victory in the elections 3 weeks later. A trove of declassified US documents released in 2021 demonstrates that Israel's strike did not eliminate Iraq's program, but rather made Saddam more determined to acquire a nuclear weapon. It also motivated more Iraqi scientists to sign up to work on their nation's nuclear program. As Iraqi nuclear scientist Jafar, again, when they romanize certain names, I can't tell, I guess it's Jafar, wrote in his memoir, the Israeli bombing of Tammuz, in other words, of Syria, had infuriated many, and they were practically forming a line to participate in ending the Israelis' monopoly of nuclear weapons in the Middle East. They proved to be more valuable to Saddam than the hardware, the reactor that he lost in the attack. In the following years, Saddam's regime made nuclear activities clandestine and reached and started reaching out to nuclear powers like Pakistan to seek assistance in developing capabilities that could be used to produce a nuclear weapon. It also tried to rebuild a destroyed reactor. These efforts slowed down only in the early 1990s due to the first Gulf War, which decimated Iraqi infrastructure, and the subsequent sanctions which drained state coffers. Now, when it comes to Iran, over the past few years, a number of Iranian nuclear scientists have been assassinated by Israel. Most recently, in November 2020, Fakhrizadeh, a nuclear physicist and high-ranking member of the nuclear program, was shot dead in an ambush near Tehran. Iran has accused Israel of carrying out this assassination and others in the past. I mean, we know the Israelis did it because they brag about it, so it's not really Iran accusing them, but fine, okay, if you want to frame it that way. While these assassinations may have killed key cadres, they have inspired a new generation of Iranians to pursue nuclear science, part of Iranian quote-unquote nuclear nationalism, emerging as a result of the constant attacks on Iran's nuclear program. The events since October 7, 2023 have further fueled this sentiment. A poll conducted between February and May of this year showed that not only has public support in Iran for a peaceful nuclear program remained incredibly high, but that now there is a growing public consensus the country should acquire a nuclear weapon. Some 69% of the respondents in the survey said they would support it. Clearly, Israel's actions so far are only increasing Iranian determination to continue its nuclear program. A strike on any of its nuclear facilities would make that determination even stronger. And if we are to go by the Iraqi example, it may drive the Iranian nuclear program underground and accelerate it towards the development of a nuclear weapon. Today, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu finds himself in his predecessor Begin's shoes. He is also leading a government widely criticized for various failures, including the one on October 7. He is also desperate to show the Israeli public a victory. But what Netanyahu is doing in Gaza and Lebanon now, and will do in Iran, will not bring victory to Israel. His strategy produces resentment in these countries and across the Middle East, which will help Iran and its allies rebuild swiftly whatever capabilities they lose to reckless Israeli strikes. Okay, I mean, look, I think there's some differences. First of all, with Begin and Netanyahu, some very big differences. Although yes, there are more similarities than differences. But nevertheless, the thing is with Iraq and Iran. I mean, I don't recall if there was a mention of the fatwa in this article. No, that must be the Foreign Policy magazine one. Anyway, so that's one difference between Iraq and Iran. You have that religious decree, which I mean, you have to deal with it. You can't just choose to ignore it. You have to unroll it. You have to get enough support in the country and with lawmakers to pressure the supreme leader to unroll that. It's not going forward otherwise. There will be no credibility. Then Scott Ritter and we talked about this some years ago. It's somewhere on the channel about this specific point. But in addition to that, I don't know if you can compare Iraq and Iran in the same put them in the same boat in terms of missile capabilities, because Iraq never had the same kind of missile capabilities that Iran does today, and I don't think that both the West and Iraq viewed each other with the same kind of animosity that you have Iran and the West viewing each other, or if you will, Iran and Israel viewing each other. I mean, Israel, for example, look, he says it in the article himself that the guy was just looking for an election victory. Israel didn't think of Iraq as being some kind of existential threat or framing it as an existential threat within the public the same way that it is today. So my point is just that the Israelis, they're much more keen, or it's much more easier to drive this point home that no, actually the Iranians are a threat, an existential threat, and vice versa. And that it's just true for multiple reasons. It's easier to reach people today with media, with social media. That's number one, right? I mean, you could not reach or like, let's say it's Israel in the 1980s. You couldn't even draw that amount of public support from the wider West. If you wanted to, you couldn't even spread that propaganda the same way that you could today. Look at what's happening in Gaza. You've seen the images in front of you, and no one is like, no one feels disturbed by that in the West. That's how strong the propaganda is. So Imagine how much you could cultivate the Iranian boogeyman. They've been cultivating that boogeyman for 50 years now, right? In the US, Israel as well has been doing it, and in the wider West. So it would be much easier to start a wider war, and that is the problem here. That's the risk of it. So, I mean, I guess what the person who wrote this is trying to drive home is that the point they're trying to drive home is basically that, look, if you go and you strike the Iranians, you might damage some of the equipment, but you're just going to make them even want a nuclear program even more. But I guess, I guess it's true, but they already have the nuclear program. It's already there anyway, and that is because it fails to take into account. Although it does to some degree with the assassinations, but that's only one part of the picture, that the West already drove Iran to that point. The West already drove Iran to that point. And now I tie in all three of them together. I'm bringing together my orchestra. That's why you're having this statement. Look, this is from today, okay, from the foreign minister saying we're done negotiating about the region. And again, I don't know if this includes the nuclear issue, but it could. It very well could. Okay, and how do we relate those three together? Well, genocide in Gaza was allowed to happen. Those assassinations of the scientists were allowed to happen. No one did anything about that. Nuclear Deal 1 was signed. I mean, JCPOA round 1 was signed, implemented, checked, cameras, seals, inspectors, everything. Full compliance, even for a year after Trump pulls out. You still put sanctions on us. Then we tried to negotiate it again, and you did nothing. And then you allowed Israel to go and blow up all the nuclear facilities. Well, not all of them, but, they sabotaged the centrifuges with Stuxnet, and then they went after Natanz again, and then they've attacked a bunch of them. At one point, it was so silly, they even took out one of the cameras, and then, they tried to blame Iran, for a camera that Israel had blown up in the facility. So this, and all these board of governors statements that they've been putting out. So it's really a giant pile of crap. Forget everything that's happened in the last year. Forget all of that. It's really a giant list of things. And the Iranians were already at least 60%, purity already before October 7th. At least. Right? As a matter of fact, hold on. I'm just double checking something else now. Because the limit on the deal, it was 3.67%, then they pushed it to 20, then it went up to 40, 60, and yeah, I think they could even hit. So there was a row afterwards if they enriched it to 84, right? They found some particles at some place, the IAEA claimed, and so on. But that's besides the point, because if you can go to 60%, and everybody is agreed that Iran has already reached 60%, the Iranians admit it. If you can get to 60, it's much easier to go from 60 to 90, which is what you would need for a bomb. And it's one thing you need for a bomb. It's not enough by itself. But my point is, it's much easier to go from 60 to 90 than it is from 3.67 to 60. That is a massive, massive leap. And they've already done it years ago. So, I think it's just kind of, it's just kind of silly at this point, because that ship has already sailed. This idea like, oh yeah, we're going to cripple the Iranian nuclear program in its infancy. This obsession they have with like killing children or euphemisms of that. No, that ship has sailed, and it has sailed. Objectively speaking, really, just objectively, you can literally measure it. I mean, it's a science. It's gone. That ship has sailed, because that subpar threshold, not subpar. What am I saying? That sub threshold. It really is kind of a strategic sweet spot. And right now, you when you're talking about hitting the nuclear sites, I mean, I don't know what it would get you. I really don't know what it would get you, because they've had years now to go in and do this diplomatically with the IAEA, and they've just been kind of like, screw it, whatever. We'll let Israel just keep like killing the scientists, and we'll kind of bleed them with sanctions. And the sanctions haven't worked. So now they're in a situation where they want to show like Iran as being kind of a nuclear threat, but they But they can't really do that because the CIA director himself is coming out and saying there's no weapons program. You see what I mean? So they've kind of they've spun themselves into a nice little knot here, and or twisted themselves rather. But you know, in addition to that, let's leave the whole nuclear issue aside. Let's drop the whole nuclear issue and put it aside. Let's focus on energy, and let's look at the map again. Okay. Let's say you go after their you go after the refinery at Abadan, you go after all the major energy hubs and everything, okay? And then what? Will that fix it? No, it won't. Just look at the geography, man. There's a choke point here, right there. This is a choke point, Strait of Hormuz. And right there is Iran. All they have to do is shut this down. The Iranians, all they have to do is shut this down. And they've threatened to do so in so many words, okay? They have said they will in so many words. Not explicitly, but in so many words. They've hinted at it. And just think of this, you know, logically, because if you're thinking, oh, well, you know, Kuwait is going to help us, Saudi Arabia is going to help us, the UAE was going to help us, and for gas, we have Qatar who can help us. Are you really sure about that? I mean, I wouldn't be so sure. I'd really worry, because as soon as the Iranians do that, even if logistically, you know, you had a teleporter that could just teleport the barrels of oil, really, like I'm not joking, like an actual, you can actually transpose them in a quantum bloody state and move them from one place to the other. It's not going to help you, because the prices are going to crash. You will cause a you know, something worse than 1973. It'll be way worse than 73. Because all people need to hear is, oh my God, world's most important oil shipping lane choked off. Now again, not all of the oil, not all of the oil and gas in the world comes through here. Okay, let's be very clear. But it's still the most important one. Okay, that's all they need to hear. And it's goodbye. So I don't know if that's really smart, you know. And I think just strategically, from a strategic point of view, they might be saving that for a rainy day. And Trump and Kushner, you know, they say go for the nuclear ones, and Biden is. I mean, these are stupid games. Just why don't you go for the negotiating table? Why don't you go and do some diplomacy instead of going for the buttons all the time? Again, you know, that's not a ship that sailed. That is not a ship that has sailed. You don't have to have an oil crisis or a gas crisis. I mean, you know, I'm just saying. This is there's a reason why they've tried to control this area a lot with you know, sinking, like you've had, you know, what are called tanker wars, or what I call tanker wars. And, you know, basically you've had Israelis trying to sink, you know, Iranian fuel ships, and then, you know, or sink Iranian fuel ships on the way to Syria and Lebanon, and monopolize this area. And this is going back a couple of years now. Okay, this is nothing to do with what's happening right now, although it does tie into it. My point is just that everybody recognizes the strategic aspect of it. I don't understand what the Americans think that, you know, Israel is going to do for them. You know, in such a case, it's really not going to look good. Anyway, let's leave it at that. And you know, there's definitely not gonna, definitely won't be any good developments with them sending American troops there. I mean, really, just this is point number one. Point number one. Nothing good is going to come of that. Nothing good is going to come of that for anyone. Never mind everything else. But it's interesting watching Al Jazeera and watching especially American outlets like Foreign Policy put out these pieces right now about Iran's nuclear program. I don't think it's the usual, oh, Iran is building a bomb kind of nonsense that we've been hearing for the last 20, 30 years. There's a big element of that in there. Yes, for sure. but they are changing their strategic posture. You know, and the fact that they're sending this THAAD over there, I think it means they understand that, you know, whatever is coming next is going to be an escalation, and that's not good. You should be sending diplomats, not more missile defense systems to get away with more whatever it is that's coming next, assassinations, genocide. I don't know. Like you know. It's basically, you're basically kind of saying like, well, I'm ready for an escalation and I don't care. Well, I mean, I don't know how that serves anyone, but okay.